The Mafia's roots lie deep in Sicily's history. This beautiful island, known for its rich culture and stunning landscapes, has a darker side that has shaped its past and present. In the 19th century, Sicily was a land of poverty and unrest. The island's inhabitants faced harsh economic conditions, with many struggling to make ends meet. The social fabric was frayed, and the people were desperate for protection and stability. Large estates, controlled by wealthy landowners, dominated the island. These landowners, known as gabelotti, wielded significant power and influence over the local population. They owned vast tracts of land and employed many of the island's poor as laborers. To protect their interests, these landowners hired armed guards, often criminals known as mafiosi. These men were tasked with safeguarding the estates and ensuring that the landowner's authority remained unchallenged. These mafiosi acted as enforcers. They were not just protectors, but also intimidators, using their muscle to maintain order and control. Their presence was a constant reminder of the landowner's power. They extorted money from locals. The mafiosi demanded payments for protection, a practice that became known as pizzo. Those who refused to pay faced dire consequences, including violence and destruction of property. They settled disputes with violence. The mafiosi were known for their brutal methods, often resorting to bloodshed to resolve conflicts and assert their dominance. This culture of violence became deeply ingrained in Sicilian society. They operated outside the law, creating their own code of silence and loyalty. This code, known as omerta, demanded absolute secrecy and non-cooperation with authorities. Breaking omerta was considered a grave betrayal, punishable by death. Over time, these groups evolved into organized criminal gangs. The mafiosi began to form alliances, creating a network of criminal enterprises that extended their reach and influence across the island. They called themselves Cosa Nostra, meaning our thing. This name reflected their sense of identity and unity, as well as their separation from the rest of society. Cosa Nostra became synonymous with the Sicilian Mafia. The Mafia thrived in Sicily's corrupt environment. The island's political and economic instability provided fertile ground for the Mafia's activities. They exploited the weaknesses of the system to their advantage. They infiltrated businesses and government. The Mafia's influence extended into various sectors, including commerce, politics, and law enforcement. They used bribery, intimidation, and violence to secure their interests. They gained power through intimidation and violence. The Mafia's reputation for ruthlessness ensured that few dared to oppose them. Their control over the island grew stronger with each passing year. They operated with their own set of rules, known as omerta, a code of silence and non-cooperation with authorities. This code was the cornerstone of the Mafia's power, ensuring loyalty and secrecy among its members. The Mafia's grip on Sicily tightened. Their influence permeated every aspect of life on the island, from the economy to the justice system. The Mafia became an inescapable part of Sicilian society. They became a force to be reckoned with. The Mafia's power and reach were undeniable, and their presence was felt far beyond Sicily's borders. Their influence extended beyond the island's shores. The Mafia's operations spread to mainland Italy and eventually to other parts of the world, including the United States. Soon, the world would learn the name of the Mafia. Their legacy of crime, violence, and corruption would leave an indelible mark on history, forever associating Sicily with the dark shadow of the Mafia. The late 19th century saw a wave of Italian immigrants arriving in America. Among them were members of the Sicilian Mafia. They settled in cities like New York, Chicago, and New Orleans. These cities became fertile ground for organized crime. The new immigrants faced poverty and discrimination. They struggled to find their place in American society. The Mafia offered them protection and opportunity. The Mafia preyed on their own people. They offered loans with exorbitant interest rates. They controlled businesses and unions. The American Mafia, like its Sicilian counterpart, operated in the shadows. They used violence and intimidation to maintain control. They bribed officials and infiltrated legitimate businesses. The Mafia's influence in America was growing. They were becoming a powerful force in the underworld. The Mafia's reach extended into many aspects of American life, from the bustling streets of New York to the quiet corners of small towns. Their influence was felt everywhere. They were not just a criminal organization. They were a shadow government operating with their own rules and regulations. They controlled labor unions, influencing wages and working conditions. Workers often found themselves caught between their employers and the Mafia, who demanded a cut of their earnings. Strikes and protests were sometimes orchestrated by the Mafia to serve their own interests, ensuring that they maintained control over the labor force. They infiltrated businesses from restaurants and nightclubs to construction and trucking. These businesses provided a front for their illegal activities, allowing them to launder money and expand their operations. The Mafia's involvement in these industries also meant that they could control supply chains and manipulate markets to their advantage. They even had a hand in Hollywood, influencing casting decisions and movie productions. Stars and directors often found themselves under the Mafia's thumb, forced to comply with their demands or face dire consequences. The glitz and glamour of Hollywood masked a darker reality where the Mafia's reach extended into the very heart of the entertainment industry. The Mafia's wealth and power grew during Prohibition. The ban on alcohol in the 1920s created a lucrative black market. Speakeasies and illegal distilleries sprang up across the country, all under the watchful eye of the Mafia. They controlled the production, distribution, and sale of alcohol, reaping enormous profits in the process. The ban on alcohol in the 1920s created a lucrative black market. Law enforcement struggled to keep up with the sheer scale of the illegal operations, and many officers were bribed to look the other way. The Mafia's ability to evade the law only added to their mystique and power. The Mafia seized this opportunity. They smuggled and sold liquor, making enormous profits. Bootleggers became the new entrepreneurs, and the Mafia's network of contacts ensured that their operations ran smoothly. The profits from bootlegging were funneled into other ventures, further expanding their criminal empire. They smuggled and sold liquor, making enormous profits. These profits funded other criminal activities such as gambling and prostitution. The Mafia's ability to diversify their operations meant that they were never reliant on a single source of income, making them more resilient and adaptable. These profits funded other criminal activities such as gambling and prostitution. Gambling houses and brothels became common sights in many cities, all under the control of the Mafia. These establishments not only generated income but also served as hubs for other illegal activities, creating a web of crime that was difficult to untangle. The Mafia's influence extended to politics. They bribed politicians and judges. They intimidated voters. Elections were often rigged to ensure that their preferred candidates won, allowing them to maintain their grip on power. The Mafia's involvement in politics meant that they could shape laws and policies to their advantage, further entrenching their position in society. They bribed politicians and judges. They intimidated voters. Courtrooms became battlegrounds where the Mafia's influence was often on full display. Witnesses were threatened, juries were tampered with, and justice was subverted to protect their interests. The legal system, meant to uphold the law, was often bent to the will of the Mafia. They used their power to protect their criminal enterprises. Mafia leaders were often seen mingling with politicians, blurring the lines between legitimate and illegitimate power. Their ability to operate with impunity was a testament to their deep-rooted influence in American society. The Mafia's grip on American society was tightening. Neighborhoods fell under their control, and residents lived in fear of retribution. The Mafia's presence was a constant reminder of the power they wielded and their ability to enforce their will through violence and intimidation. They were becoming a state within a state. Their influence permeated every level of society, from the streets to the highest echelons of power. The Mafia's ability to operate as a parallel government showcased their organizational prowess and the extent of their reach. They were not just criminals. They were a formidable force that shaped the course of American history. The Mafia's power peaked in the mid-20th century. During this time, they were not just a criminal organization, but a deeply entrenched part of the social fabric in many American cities. Their influence extended beyond illegal activities, seeping into legitimate businesses and even local politics. They controlled vast criminal empires and were seemingly untouchable. Lavish lifestyles, expensive cars, and opulent homes were the norm for high-ranking members. They operated with a sense of invincibility, believing that their power and wealth could shield them from any consequences. However, their reign wouldn't last forever. The tide began to turn as law enforcement agencies started to take notice of their activities. The public, too, began to demand action against the rampant corruption and violence. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, had long considered the Mafia a minor nuisance. Hoover initially downplayed the threat, focusing instead on other priorities. But as the Mafia's influence grew, it became impossible to ignore the extent of their criminal activities. But the growing evidence of their influence and brutality forced a change in strategy. Detailed investigations and undercover operations began to reveal the true scope of the Mafia's operations. The FBI started to compile extensive files on key figures and their networks. Law enforcement agencies began to crack down on organized crime. Raids, arrests, and surveillance became more frequent. The once untouchable mobsters found themselves under constant scrutiny, their every move watched by determined agents. New laws like the RICO Act gave prosecutors powerful tools to target the Mafia's finances and operations. The Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act allowed for the prosecution of all individuals involved in a corrupt organization, making it easier to dismantle entire networks. Informants, often former mobsters themselves, provided crucial information about the Mafia's inner workings. These turncoats, motivated by reduced sentences or revenge, exposed secrets that had been closely guarded for decades. The Mafia, once seemingly invincible, began to crumble. High-profile arrests and convictions sent shockwaves through the organization. The fear and respect they once commanded started to wane as their leaders were taken down one by one. High-profile trials sent powerful bosses to prison. These trials were often sensational, drawing public attention and further eroding the Mafia's mystique. The sight of once-feared mob bosses in handcuffs was a powerful symbol of their decline. Internal strife and violence weakened the organization from within. Power struggles and betrayals became common as the Mafia's structure began to fracture. The once unified front of the organization was now marred by infighting and distrust. By the late 20th century, the Mafia's grip on American society had loosened. The combined efforts of law enforcement, new legislation, and internal decay had significantly reduced their power. Cities that were once Mafia strongholds began to reclaim their streets. While they haven't completely disappeared, their power and influence have significantly diminished. Today, the Mafia is a shadow of its former self, a reminder of a tumultuous era in American history. Law enforcement continues to monitor and combat organized crime, ensuring that the Mafia's dark legacy does not resurface. The Mafia's history is filled with colorful and ruthless figures. Charles "Lucky" Luciano, a cunning strategist, is considered the father of modern organized crime. He organized the 5 families of New York and established the Commission. Frank Costello, known as the Prime Minister, was the elegant face of the Mafia. He cultivated relationships with politicians and businessmen, expanding the Mafia's reach into legitimate industries. Vito Genovese, a ruthless leader, seized control of the Genovese crime family. He ruled with an iron fist, eliminating rivals and consolidating his power. These men, and many others like them, shaped the Mafia's destiny. Their ambition and ruthlessness fueled the organization's rise to power. But their actions also contributed to its downfall, attracting unwanted attention from law enforcement and the public.